I'm Rob Trasinski. This is Symposium, where we talk about the ideas at the basis of a free society. My guest today is Yevgeny Simkin, who is the co-founder of Samizdat Online. Thanks for coming on, Yevgeny.
Thank you so much. I was about to say Robert, and then your name is displayed as Sherry, which and then I was
it's
like,
a
wait a minute.
it's a shared Zoom account. So, but you can call me Rob.
Yeah, Rob,
Uh,
thank you so much for inviting me on. I am a big fan of yours. I'm very honored to be in this space.
Well, I asked you to come on because of the Samizdat online organization that you're doing. So I want you to, well, first of all, explain what Samizdat means, what the origin of that is, and then what this organization is trying to do.
So Samizdat was I mean, it's hard to describe it as an organization. It was really a mechanism which wound up having a branding. And in Russian, Samizdat literally translates into self-publication. That's the simplest translation. So back in the Soviet era, there was obviously massive censorship and huge penalties, including criminal prosecution for violating that censorship. And in spite of that, people were living such miserable lives that they deemed it necessary to smuggle illicit content into the nation, that being literature and news publications and music and just basically everything that you would normally think of as free expression. And then they would make their own copies of it, and like literally with carbon paper, and distribute it underground. And the people who would receive it would make more copies and so forth. And I won't go on this tangent, but that publication or its existence is in some ways principally responsible for me winding up in America, because the information that my father gleaned from it made it essential for him to ultimately leave Soviet Russia. I was 7 at the time, so I had very little to do with the decision, but that is how I wound up in the States in 1979.
So, what is Samizdat Online trying to do in bringing Samizdat into the 21st century?
So skipping ahead 40 years or some odd, I am a technologist and have my own software engineering company. And also I'm a kind of an armchair philosopher and think a lot about social media as it happens. And one thing that social media has proven, for better or for worse, is that the power of viral distribution of information is huge. It is undeniable. People are informed much more effectively when they are cross-pollinating ideas rather than when all the ideas are coming down from some central sources. Again, I'm not necessarily saying that that's that has had massive negative implications because sometimes the ideas are terrible and they have, having not been properly vetted, they wind up in a lot of people's heads. I personally know people who genuinely believe that the earth is flat, and they're wonderful people as it happens. Anyway, the point being that this mechanism works, and I thought, okay, so there's this war happening, and there are oodles of people in autocratic nations who are confused about reality, and they are only getting exposure to their government's version of reality, which happens to not coincide with actual reality. And so this samizdat mechanism of letting people distribute information, which is essentially what we've been doing with Twitter and Facebook for a couple of decades now, is the best way to help people distribute reality, back amongst themselves. And so so I came up with and we built this tech very quickly because my co-founder Michael Sprague, who I have to mention because he is a very, very brilliant fellow and is very key to this undertaking. We had a lot of this tech already kind of in the bag for other things that we had been working on over the years, and so it was actually reasonably easy to spin up.
So it describes to me exactly what the technology is, because the problem you're dealing with is, in effect, the authoritarians, the dictators, have adjusted to the reality of the internet and have found various ways to block information from coming in. I mean, part of this has to do with the fact that that Putin's Russia has become much more interested in censorship and much more interested in blocking information. But this has been going on also for even longer in places like China, where they created the Great Firewall of China. They've created various ways of trying to filter out and preventing information on the internet from getting to the people in their country. So what is the technology that helps you get around that?
Well, depending on how into the weeds we want to get technologically, and I'm going to avoid you until you drag me into that
Give us the
milieu.
30,000 feet view.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay at altitude. Um, the irony is that the internet as a technology is actually reasonably simple and has not changed much in the 35, 40 some odd years since it's really started to be implemented around the globe. And so the kinds of things that these autocrats can do, the kinds of controls they have over their internet, is reasonably limited. So unless you become a North Korea, right? North Korea is the exception because essentially they've turned their internet off. I just called it internet. It wasn't internet. They've turned it off. And so their citizens, we can't help those because they aren't on the internet, right? They are they're using notepads and 1960s style calculators. But everywhere else where the internet actually exists, there's only so much that the autocrats can do to prevent their citizenry from seeing basically anything. Now, yes, there are certain hurdles that they can put up that are challenging, but because the essential functioning of the internet is, as I said, reasonably straightforward and unaltered, and they can't really alter it as long as they want to be on the internet, right? If they wanted to invent their own technology, whatever it is, and implement it in their nation, they could, but then that wouldn't be on the internet, and then they would have to recreate all the content of the internet for it to be engaging and useful. So, so yeah, that's really we're taking advantage of the weakness of the entire system of DNS, which is the dynamic name service that is again now we're descending in our airplane towards the weeds, and you need to stop me because I can talk about this all day. But in essence, the way that Putin and everybody else is currently protecting, quote unquote, their citizens from reality is they go into their DNS tables and they delete those domain names which they don't wish those people to see, right? Like, and it's just that simple. It's simply a chart of domain names, be it Facebook, Twitter, Bellingcat, Medusa, et cetera, which have the associated addresses where those computers reside in the world. And you delete that name or you mark it as invisible. And then the people in your region who come to that DNS machine, which is anybody in that region, they find a DNS not found error, and that's the end of that. So all we're doing, and not to say that it's simple, our technology is actually pretty interesting, but in essence, all we're doing is we're spinning up completely bogus domain names that mean nothing to anybody, right? They're just random characters. And we're registering them all over the place. And then we're syndicating all of this content at those bogus domain names. Now, the thing is that you'd need to know what the bogus domain name is in order to go and purge it from your DNS table as an autocrat. And that's very hard to do because we've got, initially thousands, eventually hundreds of thousands of them, and we're not exposing them in any way. So you don't know that they're out there, lurking about and transmitting information that you, in all your autocratic power, don't wish your citizens to see.
And now the downside of that, though, is that because you have a domain name that the dictators can't find to put on their list, it's also hard for the person searching for the information to find, and that's where the sort of viral sharing social media aspect of it comes in.
That's precisely right. And so here in 2022, what we've discovered is all of the obsession that people have devoted to making sure that the domain name is right? You go to citibank.com, right? It's not citybunk.com and it's not chittychittybangbang.com. It's citibank.com, and there's an SSL certificate. And for the purposes of banking, I think that's wonderful. Like, I don't think anybody should be, people should be very careful what the domain names are, because there's lots of very underhanded and downright evil operations which try to bring you somewhere which isn't where you belong and have you enter your password and blah blah blah. But none of that has to do with what we're doing. When we're transmitting Medusa or Bellingcat or any one of these, blocked media organizations, the content is self-evidently real. Spoofing that content would require an inordinate amount of effort. So it doesn't matter what the domain name is. If that's not what people are concerned about. They see a headline that they're interested in, they click on it, they go to the article and they read it. That's essentially all that matters.
Right. The way we use the internet to get information has changed. You don't go to a website to see what's there. You have friends and acquaintances and people you follow on Twitter sending you links and saying, oh, check out this article. And so what you basically created is a mechanism for people to send those links.
That's correct. Yeah, it's a distribution mechanism. And I mean, we are hoping to build a media enterprise that, I mean, I'm going to use this term extremely loosely, but it's sort of like Yahoo 1994, for those of us who are old enough to remember what that meant. Which is just an aggregated, centralized location that we're hoping people will come, not just for news information, but for all sorts of information. There's going to be lots of entertainment and all sorts of fun stuff to do there, along with all of this banned content that the autocrats would rather you not see. And then, yes, built right in is the sharing that you click a button, you have all of your sharing mechanisms that you would normally be sharing to pop up, and you just share, at your heart's delight, and our links are the ones we're calling them SOS links. I'm trademarking that name. They are, they look like complete gobbledygook, but again, it doesn't matter because when the link is popped into Twitter or anything like that, all of the requisite information that comes with it appears. So you get that like the initial hero photo and the headline, and so you see what you're actually interested in, and the fact that beneath that is a very long and obscure looking link is largely irrelevant, and people just don't care about that.
Now, this is also a way to help people to avoid having to have a VPN, a virtual private network.
Yes. So VPN, this is actually interesting. I mean, if we were to go into the way that this project came about, and the way the kinds of intellectual hurdles that I've had to go over get over as I think through this problem and as I try to bring people on board. Most people first and foremost say, well, what's the point? There's already VPN. Like that's their first objection. And the answer to that, to my mind, is twofold. First of all, as we've already said, there is a viral component to it, which VPN does not bring. VPN is a personal technology. You install a VPN, you use that VPN to go to something that you are looking for. There's no additional mechanism there. But yeah, the notion of being able to do this without a VPN is that you then take that link and you send it to somebody who doesn't have a VPN. That's really the most important benefit. And you don't have to convince them to install anything or to do anything. Also, VPN, meaningfully slows down the experience, because your request has to go halfway around the globe to someplace where there is no autocrat, and then reach the content you're looking for from there, and then bring it back halfway around. Eventually the travel time actually is quite meaningful. So all of that is eliminated. So yeah, there are some very substantial improvements over VPN through us. But I will confess that there's no doubt that quite successful. Our operation will be just as blocked as all these other, organs of information by the same autocrats. And then, at least initially, people will need to use VPN to get to us. Although we will be producing our own links to ourselves and publishing them in all sorts of places where it'll be possible to reach us without VPN. But that cat and mouse game is essentially unavoidable. There's going to be some initial VPN usage, but the objective here is to kind of reduce it down to its bare minimum. So people need VPN to get to us initially, but then they just take all the links they want and distribute them however they want.
So the idea is we have a small percentage of the more active and engaged people who have gone through the trouble of getting the VPN, but then they can spread that influence out among people who have not done it. It also strikes me that in addition to creating a mechanism for going around censorship, you're also sort of creating a kind of a dissident social network, or a dissident social media.
This is exactly right, and we're trying to avoid these terms for now. But I'm happy, just between you and me. There are a couple of things doing here, which I've been dreaming about for a long time, which, as it happens, they just kind of come along for the ride for free. We don't have to really do much to realize them. They're just here. So I haven't been talking about it too much because I really want to focus on the primary mission, and there's a lot of primary mission here. But yes, there's along with the social media component, which I've been writing about for forever and a huge critic of. So I'm convinced that I would do it right, unlike Elon Musk. No, I am convinced that there are things, very easy things that if the incentives were slightly different, which for us they are, things would be substantially different with these social media networks. But there's another interesting incentive-driven reality here, which is that actually, I'm going to pause for a second and tell you that I started my technology career because I was a musician and a comedian and a vagabond into my mid-20s, and then just kind of fell into technology. And very soon after that, wound up at CBS News. In there, we were building this very cool affiliate website thing. And while at CBS News, there was this giant picture of Edward R. Murrow on the wall, and there was a very strong sense of the integrity of what journalism is in the West. And one day, Dan Rather came down into our tech cave and gave us this very heartfelt lecture about who we are and what we mean to the world and yada yada. And all props to Dan. He really meant what he was saying. But like figuratively speaking, less than a week later, everything he said, like a cardboard cutout, was picked up, turned on its side by Les Moonves, and carried out the door. And we were given an edict to make, I'm going to say Honda, it may have been Toyota, but some Japanese car manufacturers' cars were to fly across the screen in front of the news content immediately, because that was necessary in order to make our operation profitable. And if we didn't do this, then we would all have to pick up our hats and go home very, very shortly thereafter, because CBS was done underwriting all of this fanciful journalism stuff. And as far as I'm concerned, Les is also not really to blame for this, because he was up against very real headwinds in the world of journalistic incentives, where everything was now something that had to make money, right? We were no longer going to have soap operas that funded this stuff. So I think that subsequently had a ferociously negative effect on the way that journalism is done, and how now everything has to incite and aggravate and upset, and everything has to get a click, otherwise nobody gets paid. So in this enterprise, again, I don't want to talk about this too loudly, but I feel like I have a massive opportunity to pull this back from that brink and give journalism back its principal incentive of simply keeping people informed rather than keeping people outraged. I don't want to get too far off track, and we have limited time, but yeah, I do have those ambitions, and if only somebody were to give us a chance, we will make this happen.
Oh, well, so I also want to talk about the role that this has in terms of getting information into dictatorships, into authoritarian regimes. And part of what we're dealing with is, you talked about a game of cat and mouse, and there has been this sort of evolution that's happened. And I think that, if you look at the sort of larger picture of the world over the last couple decades, post end of the Cold War, there was this point at which a bunch of dictatorships collapsed, and, we were headed towards the end of history. It looked like, freedom had triumphed, and, it still has, freedom has expanded tremendously. But it was like the dictatorships, the autocracies evolved. They came up with new ways of doing things, new ways of controlling information, new justifications or rationalizations or appeals to the people, much more appealing to traditionalism and nationalism, as opposed to, esoteric Marxist ideologies. And so there's been this evolution where they've decided, okay, we're changing the way we're going to have our autocratic system to make it stronger, to make it to be able to survive in this ideological competition with liberal societies. So the question I have, though, is that to what extent is making it easier for people to share information from independent journalists outside of that autocracy? To what extent does that have an impact still? as opposed to all the various, for example, Putin has this approach, and it seems to be one of the big autocratic part of the autocratic playbook of don't worry so much about what the intellectuals are talking about amongst themselves. Control the big mass media, control the cable television networks and things like that. And then, you program everybody to shout whatever's on the cable TV networks. And that's 95% of people. And so you could ignore this sort of 3% who are out there getting information from Western sources. So is it that they've actually found a way to make this outside journalism irrelevant, or does it still have a big impact?
Well, I'm going to push back very gently and say that
you can push back harder.
No, I think, well, most of what you're saying is right. So there's only so much I can push back on. But the one thing where I think I just want to make sure we're saying the same thing is Putin actually is deeply concerned about all of this information, which is why there is a multi-thousand person strong Roskomnadzor. I like to pronounce it that way because it's such an evil sounding organization, but I make it sound more evil. Anyway,
Spectre and Hydra were taken, so they had
well, exactly. And so there, there's a giant collection of very talented people whose role it is to protect the public from reality. Now, if Putin was if he did not care, right? If exactly what you just said was entirely true, and he thought, well, I have this fantastic Channel One operation where my nation is, everyone who I care about is basically enamored with the content that we provide them. And also, it's important to clarify what that content is. Most people misunderstand it to be a 1984 style, general covered in glory, standing there and wagging his finger and talking about how the West is bad and NATO is bad and Putin is good. That is not at all how this works. Most of the content is, in fact, really highly produced, NBC style drama and sports and reality shows and yada yada, and then they in between that, for 30 seconds at the half hour mark, there is a very attractive looking, usually woman, who will spout some gibberish about something that some of it may be even 30% true. It's I hate to compare it to Fox News, but it's got a Foxian style. And then back to the sports and the drama and the comedy. So there's a lot of sort of under.
And I've seen a lot of the Russian news shows. They have the simulation of the kind of debate style news show we have. We have various different experts, and they're going hammer tongs at each other, but it's within a very narrow little range of dissent that's permitted. But you create the illusion of people having a vigorous debate.
Well, yeah, and the is usually so far in the fringe that somebody says, no, we should just drop nuclear bombs on them, and the other one's like, well, that would be a little rough, why don't we just put them all in a gulag? And that's the liberal, so so that's not entirely what you expect, but something like that. But the point is that there is Putin is principally preoccupied with making sure that the masses do not have access to the content that we are getting them access back to, right? So if he wasn't, then I wouldn't be as motivated to do what I'm doing, because I do think that he's onto something. I mean, essentially, and I quip about this, although this is not a laughing matter, but Putin has turned out to be woefully incompetent at absolutely everything other than his propaganda machinery, right? Like that's the one place where he's actually doing gangbusters, but everywhere else, he's failing woefully. Well, actually, he's also an unbelievably successful mafia boss, probably the most successful mafia boss in the history of mafia bosses. But that doesn't help his citizenry anyway. So the point is that I think that to whatever extent I can disagree with your point, it is that the nation. It's not like the nation is living in complete delusion and we're going to turn on these organs of information for them and they're going to have a Neo from the Matrix style awakening in their pod and suddenly realize where they are. That is not going to happen, and that's not what we're hoping for. The thing that we're hoping for, and I see a lot of evidence for this, is that most people in these nations, specifically we're talking about Russia, but this is true in every autocracy, they are living normal, to some extent, bedraggled lives, right? They're trying to keep themselves fed. They're trying to keep their children educated and from starving to death, etc. They are not overly concerned about what's going on beyond their borders. They're not aware and they don't care. But they're decent people. So if they were to be given some hints of what's going on, and if we were to sow some seeds of doubt about whether or not it is in fact Biden and the West that is responsible for whatever their troubles are, or maybe somebody a little bit closer to home, that like it's about shaking them loose from their delusions and then getting them to just have some doubts. That's all there is. Like as long as they're no longer 100% certain that it is in fact you and me who is responsible for whatever woes they suffer, that's really all that you can ask for. And you only need 15-20% of the nation to develop those doubts before Putin's grip on his, on what happens slips to a point where it will collapse.
Yeah, I think that we have the history of the Cold War to demonstrate that, because you had
right.
Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty and all these things where it did not immediately break the grip of the propaganda machine, but it chipped away at it in a very significant way. That when people wanted, when the official lies became unconvincing, it gave an alternative that was out there.
Yes, and if these people were living, is the expression high on the hog, large on the hog? But anyway, I know there's a
high
hog
on the
in the
hog.
expression. So
High on the hog.
If
the better
lives...
cuts of meat are higher up on the
hog. Oh,
hog.
I see.
That's
interesting.
Yeah.
Right. You know what? I'm going to use the excuse that I wasn't born here, even though it's not really fair. Yeah, when people are living high on the hog, it's much, much harder to push them around because they really don't care. They don't want to care. Everything's fine. And I think the United States is a perfect example of that. I mean, I think there's the U.S. has done some pretty unsavory things over the course of the decades, and most Americans know basically nothing about them because they don't need to, because things are so good. But in Russia, things aren't good at all, and they're only going to get worse. Certainly, now that Russia's become an international pariah and they're being sanctioned, but even without the sanctions, things are really tough. So it's easier when you have a bunch of people who are already living very unhappy lives to show them that the reason for their unhappiness is much closer to home and they could do something about it, right? It's one thing to blame Biden across the seas. It's something else to blame your local mayor or your local police force for being 100% corrupt and the thing is, they all know this. It's not like we are educating them in the reality that their police force is corrupt. Everyone in Russia knows that everything is bought and paid for. There is no law and order, that the judge is going to rule in whoever favor paid him the most and all this. They know they live in this completely broken society. But somehow they still manage to believe that somewhere at the top, if only the West stopped, oppressing them however they're doing it, finally things would get better. But anyway, that's
I agree with that. That they do. I found it fascinating when they try to gauge corruption. There were people go out and try to measure the levels of corruption in different countries. They found the most effective way is just poll people, because if you're in a corrupt society, everybody knows it's corrupt. Right. So you just do a public opinion poll, and if everybody says it's corrupt, it's corrupt. It's not that it's not hidden. But so we've talked a lot about Russia because obviously the war in Ukraine right now, and you're from Russia, so this is close to home and very relevant. But just briefly go over what are the other countries that you're targeting with this, or that you're looking to reach?
Yeah. So right out of the gate, we are. Because of the two editors that we pulled in, Anna Trubachova and Stas Kucher are on our team. They are both very prominent journalists. Stas is from Russia, Anna is from Belarus. And so we immediately have all of these connections to Belarusian and Russian journalism and media outlets. And so that's where we're starting. But there's absolutely no reason to stop there. And I figured if I'm going to poke a couple of autocrats in the eye, may as well just poke all of them in the eye. They can only kill me once, So
don't sit by the window.
No, I'm avoiding sitting by the window, and I don't drink any more tea offered to me by any strangers. But no, I'm joking. I don't think I'm in any immediate mortal peril. Although who knows? But yes, so we are going to venture off into Iran and China and Hungary and Brazil and ultimately. So here's the thing: our doors are open, and we've actually had a lot of people come to us from all over the globe, and the only criteria by which we add publications to our list is that they are blocked by their autocrat. That's it. So if you're listening to this and you run a media organization that has been blocked by an autocrat, please contact us at samizdatonline.org, and we will syndicate you, and we will get you back into the hands of your audience. So yeah, there is no limiting factor here other than that. The only thing is currently we're just a nascent organization. I don't have any fluent Farsi speakers or fluent Mandarin speakers, and our enterprise is going to be seeking out the most interesting content in those languages and then publishing it on our site eventually. So right now we're dealing mostly with Russian, Ukrainian, Belarus languages and English. But very soon we will be venturing into everything else.
Okay, well that's a good transition to where I wanted to end, which is how can people find out more about this? How can they find the site? How can they support the site? Give us your sort of sales pitch here.
So we are at samizdatonline.org. I'm not going to spell it, but it's going to be. I'm assuming it'll be.
In the title. Yeah, we'll have a link.
And we are we're actually we are still nonprofit, but we're actively switching over into a for-profit organization just because we realize that it's going to cost so much money to run this thing, and there's a potential to actually make money and distribute it to the very publications that we're unblocking, and it would be the first truly benevolent corporation. I'm kidding, but it will be fully benevolent. We are everybody wins up and down the line, except for Putin and other autocrats. So yes, but we are accepting donations if you want to help. We eagerly need them, and this operation is quite costly to run. Anybody interested in investing, by all means, let us know. That's basically the sales pitch. We're here. We are going to be poking every autocrat in the eye as hard as we can, and maybe we can save the world. Who knows?
Okay, so that's samizdatonline.com. I'll have a link to it.
It's .org.
Excuse me. Samizdatonline.org. I'll have a link to it. The word Samizdat will be spelled out in the title of wherever people encounter this. I really wish you luck on that. And like I said, Radio Free Liberty, Radio Free Europe, those are the things that help break it the first time. I think you have a role to play in chipping away at the control of the autocrats. So thanks so much for coming on to tell us about this.
Robert, thank you so much. I'm genuinely honored and look forward to continuing this into the future.
I'm Rob Trasinski. My guest today has been Yevgeny Simkin of Samizdat Online. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit like or subscribe either on YouTube or on your favorite podcasting service. And for more discussion about the ideas behind the Free Society, you can go to symposium.substack.com. Thank you for joining the conversation.